Welcome to the Bear Up Podcast. I'm Brandon Consalvi, and we're here to help people help people. We help faith-driven leaders bring clarity and stability to disorienting seasons of organizational change. Now let's get into it. Most organizations don't have a strategy problem. They have a bottleneck problem. And today we're going to be picking up on where we left off last time in the organizational life cycle. If you haven't watched that or listened to that, please do. That's episode 1 on the Bear Up Podcast. We introduced this concept in the midst of diagnosing our organizational problems, understanding underperformance, things like that. Bottlenecks is a really important concept because it comes down to how we understand our own operation. So today we're going to be talking about finding the bottlenecks. And to do that, we have to talk about workflows and workflow design. That's a tool that is going to be utterly essential to your ability to streamline your processes and prepare your business for the long term. So we'll also be focusing on why leaders focus on the wrong problems again, looking at symptoms versus root causes, and figuring out the relationship between workflow and organizational health. So let's start. So part 1, what is a workflow? If you've probably heard the term, and you might even be able to associate it with operations or processes. But really, a workflow in a concept is just a process of getting from point A to point B, right? It's what moves through your organization. If you're a product-based company, it's really easy to conceptualize because it's what you start with raw materials. Well, you start with an order. You start with demand. You get your raw materials, you put it through the manufacturing process, you spit it out into fulfillment and shipping, and you get it to your customer. And in between all that, there's a sales process and there's procurement and supply chain, right? So getting your product or service from an idea to the actual end user is a workflow. And within your big old workflow, there's all kinds of micro workflows. Really, every bit of work that gets done within your organization is subject to some kind of flow or process of work. If you operate a business where every time you pick up the phone or enter that door, it's something different, then that's chaos. You haven't systematized anything. You haven't streamlined anything. You haven't probably defined anything. And then you got to take a big step back. But again, a workflow is just how work moves through your organization from start to finish, right? It's a pathway of information, of decisions, of deliverables, and every organization has one, whether they intend to or not, right? Because this is just how humans tend to operate, right? We like patterns, we like consistency, we like the path of least resistance, and the path of least resistance is consistent habits and definition. So a good workflow, as you might imagine, brings clarity, it results in efficiency, it adds accountability, and it results in growth, right? A bad workflow, again, in the concept of thinking and defining how your processes go in your organization, a bad workflow is the opposite, right? It's confusing, there's duplication, there's delays, there's inefficiencies, obviously, and there's burnout. Right? So a good workflow brings clarity, efficiency, accountability, resulting in growth. A bad workflow, confusion, duplication, delays, and burnout. As a tool, a workflow is not really that helpful if it's just conceptual. Even if you're actually performing your workflow as intended, it's not the most effective tool until you actually see it. So the most critical piece of workflow is the visual documentation of it. And by that, literally, you're going to sit down and write out, whether you put it in boxes, whether you use software, which there are some that I love. If your business makes peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, you're going to write out, what is that initiating factor, right? That is a hungry child walking into the room saying, Mom, Dad, can you make me a sandwich? So you have an initiating demand that gets your process engaged, right? It's the catalyst, it's the trigger that says, okay, start process from step 1. And that process, if it's a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, it's entering the kitchen, opening up your fridge, or going to your counter or your bread box, pulling out a loaf of bread, going to your refrigerator, opening it up, getting out jelly, opening your pantry or your cupboard. Or if you're like my wife who buys organic peanut butter, she keeps it in the fridge. It's not how I grew up, but so be it. Right? And then you have to go over to your inventory shed, and we call that a utensil drawer, right? Getting out your butter knife or two, if you like to keep those things separate. And then you go through the process, whatever your process is of making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You put those pieces of bread together, you go get your plate. If it's an artisanal manufacturing concept, you give it to them how they want it, right? Cut the crust off, cut it at a diagonal, and you have a happy consumer. For your workflow, for everything that you do in your organization that has a meaningful process to it, you're going to sit down and think through in as granular of detail as you possibly can stomach and write out, okay, when an order is submitted, when a customer calls, whatever that trigger is that starts that process, what's step one? So let me give you an example. Content creation. Okay, it's a very popular, growing industry. I'm doing it right now. The initiating demand, right, is my deadline. I'm committed to putting out one new piece of content every week. And I schedule it out. I calendarize it. That'll be something that we talk about later on in this channel. The importance of calendarizing your work if you want anything to get done. Every time, same day of the week, after I've outlined and researched and gotten the idea together, I sit down and I record. So the initiating factor is box 1, I have a deadline. Box 2, I outline and research what I'm going to do. Box 3 is I sit down and I record. Box 4 is post-production editing. Box 5 is doing a final mix with the intro and the outro and the music and all these things that you guys hear. Box 7, developing the thumbnail for the YouTube post. Box 8, developing the description or metadata or tags and all the things that are required. Box 9 would be uploading it to those platforms and then defining the chapters and whatever the back end needs for each platform. And then whatever box we're on, 9 or 10, filling out all the information and submitting it. Box 11 would then be taking all of those links after I verify that they're uploaded and published, taking those links and then marketing them on social media or sharing them however I'm going to share them, right? So that's a 10 or 12 step process for content creation. Now, that process gets more complicated depending on the type of content that you're doing. Right now, I'm a talking head. That's one of the concepts. This podcast is going to also include other types of content that may bring on other guests, in which case, if I am going to anticipate having people on, then part of my early developmental stages is going out and contacting people to come on the podcast. And that's either going to start because I have a topic I already want to talk about and I got to find somebody to speak on that, or I have a person that I want to talk to and then we're going to find out what they want to talk about. And that'll determine the next course of action. So I hope that makes sense if that's simple enough to understand. But defining and documenting is the most critical piece of a workflow for your operations. And the reason for that is because obviously content creation is a pretty simple process, but most businesses don't have that simple of processes. You'll have a 20-step process of just one process in your organization, sometimes 30 or 50, depending on having to put it into decision loops and passing it through multiple decision makers or people verifying work or quality control or whatever the needs are of that process. It gets you from talking about it to actually understanding it because you're visually seeing it. The process of actually writing it down oftentimes will bring out questions. It'll reveal, wow, is this actually really what we want to do with it? right? So hidden complexity will become visible. If we looked at the critical pieces of it, why the documentation of your workflow matters, there's 5 reasons. 1, it brings you from talking about it to understanding it. 2, the hidden complexity of what your processes are becomes visible, right? What you thought was a 5-step process is actually 17. So as a leader or a manager or a team leader, those things become revelatory, right? You might get completely inspired. You might stumble on that epiphany of how we could make this better intuitively, instantly. Number 3, everyone gets to see the same thing. There's a big accountability advantage here because every person on your team or every person that touches that workflow, you show them that visual workflow, that piece of paper or that PDF or that email, and you say, hey, this is where you fit in this process. This is what comes before it. This is what comes after it. And you can also see the end result of how it all works, where it all begins. If you're a big organization, oftentimes your people in the middle of the road have a narrow tunnel vision of where they fit in the system. This actually really helps contextualize things. Number 4, it's nearly impossible to improve what you cannot see. Again, going back, if you thought it was a 5-step process and it's actually 17 and the problems you have are on step 9, you're not going to be able to see it. You have blinders on because of this idea of implicit bias, groupthink, all of the psychological things, the clogging of our systems that try to declutter our brain and allow us to operate in simplicity, and in this case, artificial simplicity. You won't be able to improve it. You won't be able to actually grow. And the 5th thing is it survives turnover. So there are 5 main, and there are more. There are 5 primary advantages to visually documenting your workflow. Well, number 1, brings you from talking about it, thinking that you understand it, to actually understanding it, right? Hidden complexity becomes visible, right? You go from thinking of it was 5 steps to 17, right? Everyone gets to see the same thing, to understand where they fit, to operate on the same page. Communication and clarity is the key to streamlining. Number 4, you can't improve what you can't see. Just being able to see it, gaining all that clarity means you can actually go improve things. You can make things better. And 5th, it's turnover proof. Your operations will stay humming and streamlined even when those important people leave, and hopefully all for good reasons. So in practice, you have to map it out before you can fix it. Use a whiteboard, use sticky notes, use digital tools, draw it in boxes, put arrows on it, make it a big mind map, give it to somebody who's visually gifted and organized to beautify that whole kind of chaos, and make the invisible visible. Okay, so the second major part of this concept is, how do we identify bottlenecks now? We have the tool. The workflow, the visualized workflow, is now a tool that will serve you, not just because it provides clarity, but now it provides a focal point. It provides a map of your processes where you now can go and identify the bottleneck. You know what a bottleneck is. In the context of a workflow or a process, it's the one point on that map, or unfortunately multiple points on that map, where work gets stuck, it gets delayed, it gets slowed down. It's the constraining limit to your capacity or your velocity of getting work from concept to end user. So the concept of velocity is extraordinarily important. Velocity, right, is just the rate of change. If you go back to high school physics, right, it's the combination of speed and direction. And it's measured by the rate of change within all of that, right? So within a workflow, getting from one box to the next, the speed is going to change from box to box, right? getting that initiating order, right? If you're e-commerce, for example, the initiating event is an order comes through. Yes, great. Our business is making money. That might be automated to get it from that point to the next point, which is maybe fulfillment. The sales order comes through, it gets piped through your CRM, you've already automated it, and it goes right into the ordering system so that your picker or your fulfillment manager sees it and begins the process of pulling it from inventory, packaging it, shipping it, right? So the difference in speed between box to box is a very important factor. And you add it up and it measures the velocity of getting it from your initiating moment to your end user. So we're always tackling velocity. As an operator, velocity is the magic measure of the health of our process. And all the other organizational health factors, communication, culture, process design, availability of resources, all of those things contribute to the velocity of the process, the velocity of that workflow. So the theory of constraints here, which is you're only as fast as your slowest point, it's the cliche, you're only as strong as your weakest link, is very much a part of being a bottleneck hunter. When you're looking at your workflow and you're sniffing out, and you can go and map. If you're a hands-on physical paper kind of person, you print out or you've written out that workflow. Every time you draw a line from one box to the next, and the box being your major events in the process, that line represents time or speed. So what you're going to be looking for is, okay, how fast did I get from that box to that box? How fast did I get from that box to that box? If you're granular and you're diligent about it, you're going to want to know what those time gaps are every week, every month, every quarter, every year, to measure whether or not that little piece is improving or not. So now that you have all of these boxes and lines representing time, you recognize at any one of those steps, there will be bottlenecks. It's given. You will never be able to rid your workflow of a bottleneck because those times vary. It's not possible to have a process where every moment of time and every step of that process is identically efficient. Doesn't exist. So your responsibility, your priority is focusing on the thing that constrains you the most, that sucks up your time the most, and finding out ways to mitigate that, fix it, make it go faster. So let's talk about the different types of bottlenecks. In general, there's about 5. The first one is decision-making bottlenecks. You might be saying, preaching to the choir, brother. You might know that this is the primary reason, as much as you're involved in whatever workflows are a part of your ecosystem, decision-making bottlenecks happen oftentimes because everything's going through one person, which I've experienced many times, or the other side of that coin, it's going through too many people, and there's too many steps in the process. This is the essential components of what we call bureaucracy that just slows down, bogs everything down. The symptoms of this, right, is that you need to have meetings for simple approvals, right? You have to delay launches of products, or you have to keep artificially pulling back or extending that calendar out. Key symptom that you have a decision-making bottleneck. Or there's constantly team members waiting for the next thing. That's a massive waste of time and resources, right? All of that means is payroll. Those are just dollars getting sucked out of your revenue for people to just sit and wait for an inefficient process to take effect. So number 1, decision-making bottlenecks. Number 2, information bottlenecks, right? This is critical info that you need that's either in one person's head or that's a part of a workflow where somebody has to initiate it or send it to keep the process moving on. This is one of those opportunities where you have another team member waiting for information. So the symptoms for that would be asking your coworker, hey, can you tell me what to do about X? And they say, you need to go ask Dave. You need to go ask Susan, which just reveals that that individual is the only one that's got that important information, that essential information that is key to your workflow, and then work stops, right? If they're on vacation, work slows. If they're sick, work slows. So information bottlenecks is number 2. Number 3, approval bottlenecks. So kind of like the decision bottlenecks, where those are just simple on the fly yeses or nos. The approval system, so if you think about content creation, if you're doing content for an organization, you might have 5 or 6 different people that have a lot of concern over what's getting pumped out. It's not just your creative director, not just your marketer, not just your operations guy, but it might be all 3 and then some, right? So there's too many sign-offs required to keep velocity going through your workflow. Symptoms of this would be just those long approval chains where you're, again, waiting. Time is the key measure, the key metric. So those long approval chains are things just waiting in limbo. Number 4, capacity bottlenecks. These are sometimes harder to fix. This is where one person or a team is getting overwhelmed. You know, they're stressed out, they're burnt out, people are doing multiple jobs, right? Oftentimes this might be a systems problem, this might be a team size problem. You might have been moving from a startup or young organization into one that is growing and expanding, and you can't have a bunch of hat racks walking around like you used to. So symptoms of this is work is piling up, right? We're missing deadlines. We're putting out fires instead of being able to stay at that 5 or 10,000 foot view for you business leaders, where we're having to dive in and fix constantly. And you may love that. That might be your gifting. That's not a healthy organization. Other capacity bottlenecks might be not human related, but equipment related. If you're a manufacturing company, you've got one machine and there's only so many hours of the day and so much volume that machine can do, which means it's fixed. I mean, that's the definition of fixed. If that machine can only produce 1,000 units an hour and there's only 24 hours in the day and you're willing to schedule 24 hours around the clock, there's only 24,000 units that can get made every day. Completely fixed. What do you do about that? You upgrade the machine to get you 1,500 units. You buy a second machine, and then your capacity can get fixed. 5th thing, last thing, handoff bottlenecks. When it's going from one person, one stakeholder in a process to the next. Oftentimes work can get stuck in transitions, right? We pass the baton or we toss them the ball. And if your process isn't very well defined, where it's very clear and it's hard to miss when that transition happens, and instead it's just an email that gets lost in the ether of the 100 emails a day that this individual is getting, super easy to lose, work gets bogged. And until somebody cries foul, or that customer in particular, or that end user is saying, hey, where's my whatever, it oftentimes isn't realized because the person who passed the ball, it's off their radar. And the person who was waiting for it or is responsible for it missed it. Happens every day. So the symptoms of this, right? If you remember this, I thought you were handling that. Right? I sent you that email. Did you see it? Right? It's dropped balls. I always like the idea of spinning plates as a leader, as a person who's been a career hat rack, right? All these plates are spinning, and somebody says, oh, here's another plate, right? It gets dropped inevitably, right? So there are decision-making bottlenecks, information bottlenecks, approval bottlenecks, capacity bottlenecks, and the handoff bottleneck. So how do we spot them? That's the question. How do we know which is which? Some of them are pretty obvious, right? But there's some nuance between like the decision-making or approval bottlenecks. So here's some diagnostic questions to help you figure that out. Ask yourself, where does work get stuck most often? Again, we're looking for the thing that constrains the most, not just diagnosing the type of bottleneck it is. What's constraining us the most? So where does the work get stuck most often? What takes longer than it should? Again, that requires that you know what the should is. Oftentimes, that might just be the history of that process or that step in the workflow. It used to take an hour. Now it's taking an hour and a half. What's going on? Who's the person that's constantly overwhelmed? Again, you need to know your people. Bible says a good shepherd knows the state of their flock. So you need to know who your people are. Some are more sensitive to stress than others. So just because a person is vocal doesn't mean that they're the most constraining thing, but you need to have your ears open. You need to filter that through who you know them to be and then measure that against history, right? Because they have their own patterns, right? If that pattern is changing, pay attention. Where do handoffs fail? Where are you seeing that baton dropped the most in your processes? And then lastly, what do clients or team members complain about the most? Is it in the quality control side of things? Is it in the fulfillment timeline? Is it in the lag time between getting a call back? So let's wrap up this part with an honest truth. As you're looking at your workflow and you're assessing your organization, you need to be aware that the bottleneck or the thing that's constraining the most is often you. If it's a person, it's often you. In young organizations, that founder leader quickly becomes the ceiling of their organization. And by ceiling, it's the limit that you bump up against and can't get beyond until that is fixed. That's one of the first significant bottlenecks that a young organization is going to have to confront. For later stage organizations, and you start bringing in middle managers, because of the decision-making bottlenecks, the approval bottlenecks, you might be the one that has grown up in the organization, so you have all the information and you're now in an information bottleneck. Or you've inserted yourself into the process and now there's handoff bottlenecks because you're overloaded and you're missing things. Just be aware when you're looking at your workflow, you're in that system. So if we go on a side quest here and we digest the concept of the workflow, the need to visualize it, the concept and the reality of bottlenecks as a risk to the velocity of your process and workflow. What are some of those myths or the risks that are a part of every organization, philosophies, ways of thinking that are going to keep you from engaging in this process, right? Number one is the idea that we're too small to need this kind of thing. Sitting down to do workflow mapping takes time. It brings you to another level operationally. And the idea is it needs to be a complex process to really require this kind of effort. And in reality, it couldn't be further from the truth. Because we're always going to be going from simplicity to complexity as an organization. Your processes are never going to stay that simple. So starting with visibility and clarity is, number one, going to guarantee that you graduate from being a startup to a young, growing organization. That's going to get you there the fastest. I mean, obviously you have to have a quality product or service, and you have to have a good sales process, and you have to have good marketing and market visibility, of course. But operationally, this is what's going to graduate you the quickest. So small organizations probably actually need this the most as far as its ability to impact the organization. Larger organizations, even though they bog and there's bureaucracy, there's enough people in the process that can keep things moving forward. The next myth would be that workflows just slow us down, right? So this is young organization startup mentality, where we just need to keep moving. And in the concept that I always like to pull back is that we're just turning knobs and flipping switches. Like just be busy, stay busy, and every now and then kick that ball forward, right? The idea, which is faulty logic, is that doing things that way is actually going to make things slower. When in reality, it's the opposite. It's absolutely the opposite. There's so much wasted time, energy, and resources kind of flying by the seat of your pants or doing things on intuition and feeling, or even as that young organization where you just know, you know what it needs to take, but you haven't gone through the process to see what that process is and if it could be made better. So you're just going to do things the way they've always been done, right? That's a lack of progress that slows things down. Number 3, we can just figure it out as we go, right? A lack of vision, a lack of perspective, and objectivity is always going to keep your organization small and slow. So when you start experiencing the chaos of the moment, which is oftentimes when this thinking comes up of let's just keep going, we'll figure it out, right? Because somebody said, oh my gosh, we need to do this, or we need to think about this. And the response is, we'll just figure it out as we go, right? It's already a chaotic situation. And the reason why that chaos exists is probably because you never designed a workflow. And the 4th and final myth is that the process of visualizing it, right? You might be in an organization where your leaders can tolerate the idea of discussing it, but documenting it, putting it on a piece of paper and going through that tedious but exciting process might take you 30 minutes, even 90 minutes, depending on how many people you have in that room, because you always want all of your primary stakeholders in the room so you don't miss steps. Everybody that's a part of this process, unless they have a very minor role, and you need to guarantee that you know exactly what they do and how they do it, needs to be in the room contributing to this process. And at any given time, as that workflow is getting designed, that person might say, man, I've always thought we should do it this way. And now you get to make a decision. You can change and improve that process in the moment. But the complaint is, no, drawing it out is just busy work. It's a failure to recognize the value and saying, no, that 1 hour of work is not an hour that we can afford right now. But in reality, that 30 minutes of work might save you 30 hours a week in your processes. You can't afford not to do it. Now, part 3. What do we do strategically in response to our newly discovered bottlenecks? The framework here is diagnose, prioritize, address. Knowing the bottlenecks is just step 1. That's the diagnostic part. That's where we look at part 2 and we ask ourselves the questions. We get really good at the honest answers of what's wrong. And then we have to prioritize. That's the step 2. So step 1, diagnose, use the questions, be brutally honest, find the root cause, not just be seduced by the symptoms. Step 2 is prioritize based on impact. To gauge impact, we're going to ask ourselves, if we solved this, what do we unlock? What's going to create the most capacity if we removed it altogether? Now, bottlenecks oftentimes are nearly impossible to completely remove. We can just minimize them. And that's the trick, is we're just constantly trying to squish the impact of that bottleneck. Getting back to the manufacturing capacity bottleneck, we can't remove the machines, but the industry might innovate. We could replace them. But the best we can do in those situations without substantial innovation within the industry is do our best with the capacity it has to offer, or double the capacity by buying another machine. But we can't remove the limit. And then the last question is, what causes the most pain? Right? So if all of those things together, if we solve this, what is it going to unlock? What creates the most capacity if we removed it altogether? What's causing the most pain? Will pretty quickly reveal what our priorities should be. Now, the main prioritization question that we have is, again, what's the one bottleneck that if we fixed it would make the biggest difference in 90 days? It's too hard to look at it and prioritize it sometimes if we're just looking at it on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. But in 3 months, this quarter, What's going to move the needle the most if we were able to eliminate it or minimize it? That's going to scream out, most often than not, that priority that should be focused on, where nothing else matters, and we're going to attack this bottleneck. Once we've determined what that bottleneck priority is, the third and final step of the process is to address it strategically. There are 4 main ways that we will address a bottleneck. We'll eliminate it, we'll automate it or systematize it, we'll delegate or distribute it, or we'll add capacity, right? But that's the one that we have to be real careful with. So the first one is we eliminate it, which may sound odd because like I just said, most of the time we can't eliminate it, we can minimize it. But where we can eliminate it is when we have those bureaucratic bottlenecks, the approvals or the decision-making bottlenecks, where we can remove a step entirely by cutting out the unnecessary approvals. By removing one person from the equation, we can eliminate a bottleneck. Second one, we can automate or we can systematize, right? We can use tools, templates, checklists, AI now, a CRM with automations in it that can pass the baton from one person or one team member to the next automatically. So we can automate or we can systematize to increase velocity. Number 3, we can delegate or distribute it. Let somebody else do it. If you're the bog, or if you find the person that's the bog and they're overwhelmed, delegate it to somebody else that won't be encumbered by their capacity. And then finally, we can add capacity. This one, again, like I said, it has to be very carefully considered because like we talked about in organizational lifecycle before, there are a lot of problems that throwing one more body at it is only going to actually make it worse. So hiring, adding human capacity is only really the option after all the other options are being explored, right? After we've had a brutally honest assessment, and maybe we are at that stage in the organization where we've gone from startup to growth or late growth, and our systems are in place, but we just need to add more people, right? We have so much demand in our market, we need to add fulfillment people, or we have so much efficiency in our manufacturing or fulfillment or distribution that we need to add salespeople. We just aren't getting enough visibility. One of the most common mistakes as we are looking for ways to address the bottleneck is that we skip right to option 4. We feel like our fix is throwing people at the problem instead of fixing the workflow, instead of addressing the bottleneck. The result is we only increase the frustration, we add to the chaos, we reduce revenues, we make all the classic mistakes by thinking it's a human problem and not a workflow problem. So when we're addressing the bottlenecks, there are some strategic implications, some strategic approaches as we're looking at the different types of bottlenecks, not the different strategies of them. If it's a decision-making bottleneck, our priority is empowering others and clarifying authority. We want to be able to trust our down-the-line leaders, our down-the-line workers, without adding more bureaucracy in the decision-making process. Number 2, the information bottleneck. Our priority at that point is documentation and knowledge management and getting that information outside of individuals' heads and onto a database, onto a standard operating procedure, into a CRM, into an automation of some kind, where that information is going to be accessible whether or not that person is on the floor. Thirdly, if it's a capacity bottleneck, our priorities at that point are going to be optimizing the workflow before hiring, like we just mentioned. Capacity oftentimes can be greatly increased through efficiency, not more heads. And then lastly, the handoff bottleneck. The priority there is role clarity, ownership, and sometimes looking at your communication pathways, which is its own workflow, and making sure that there aren't any issues there where there's just a chasm in your communication pathway. So the key principle here is that your bottleneck is going to dictate your strategy. The type of bottleneck it is going to dictate how you address it. And choosing to address the constraint means you're strategizing for your growth. I'll say that again. Your bottleneck dictates your strategy, and addressing that constraint strategizes toward your growth. The last part of looking at bottlenecks is I want to make it practical in your role right now. This week, I want you to pick one core process. A core process, not the lowest hanging fruit. Pick the most meaningful process that you have in your organization, and I want you to map it out. And again, that means every step and every person involved, taking it from whatever that initiating, make sure you identify that initiating moment, the trigger that engages that process, all the way through to it arriving at the end user. Map it out, every step, every person. And then identify where work gets stuck. Sometimes it'll be real obvious. You'll be able to point right to the spot where things are just slow for whatever the reason is. Then in the next 2 weeks, I want you to diagnose your bottlenecks. I want you to ask, if we fix this, what unlocks? And then choose your strategy. Are we going to eliminate? Are we going to automate? Are we going to delegate? Or do we have to add capacity? Then within the next 90 days, if it takes that long, I want you to address that bottleneck and measure the impact. And then move on to the next one. Addressing bottlenecks requires a mindset shift. We cannot address every problem at once. The best and most important thing you can do as a leader is to focus on that which constricts the most in your process, hammer it, tackle it, do everything you can to mitigate it, eliminate it, delegate it, automate it, add capacity to it, and then move on to the next one, and then the next one. Find your bottlenecks, fix them, move on to the next one at a time, based on that which constrains the most. So to recap here, number one, workflows are how work moves. It's every activity of your business. Number two, documenting those workflows are essential to operating efficiently and growing. Number three, bottlenecks are the constraining element to having maximum velocity in a workflow. Number four, the kind of bottleneck you have is going to determine your strategic priority as an operator. Number five, how you address those bottlenecks will happen in one of four ways. You'll eliminate it, you'll automate it, you'll delegate it, or you'll add capacity to it to increase that velocity at that step of your process. And lastly, remember, you cannot grow or scale unless you do this, unless you become a bottleneck hunter. So get out and hunt bottlenecks. Thanks for listening. If this episode resonated with you, please consider subscribing to this channel. And more importantly, share this with another leader who's navigating their own season of strain. If you find that you're ready to develop and stabilize your business, let's have a conversation. Reach out at bearupdevelopment.com. Again, bearupdevelopment.com. Until next time, bear up and keep going.